Hello, and it's really nice to be here. How's the day going? I know the conference just started. I hope you're going to have a blast during the next couple of days with Convey UX. My name is Lucia Turco, and I'm a lead user researcher based in London, in the UK. So we are almost at the end of the day here. And today we're going to be talking about the importance and the role of ethics in product development. Alrighty, so every time I end up talking about work with my mom, she will end up asking me, what do I do for a living anyways? She never really gets it. Doesn't this sound familiar with any of you? So I always try to explain what I do, and I therefore say, oh, I'm a user researcher and I help design products and services. And my mom usually goes blank. She really doesn't get it. So in recent years, I've started to explain what I do in a much simpler way. And I talk about the core of what I do, which is I solve problems with people, for people. It's easy. And even my mom gets it. So the type of work that I do working at the front line of user research really means that I get to deal with complex issues of triggering nature. And that means working with vulnerable individuals and dealing with loads of different types of stories. And I guess that dealing with people is central to designing a product. Being a digital product, being a service, whatever it is that you do. And whatever the discipline, if you are a user researcher, but also if you're a product person, if you are a product designer, any type of designer really, you will get to deal with people. That's at the core of what we do. And when we deal with people, it means that, yes, our work is focused on improving the products and services that we're helping building. But that's obviously the ultimate goal. But at the core of what we do in dealing with people and involving them in developing those products and services, it's an exchange of data in order to improve the products and services that we're building. Data, when I refer to data, I don't think of data as something non-personal. I think about the stories, the identity, and the dignity that those people as individuals end up sharing with us so that we can really learn about the way they interact and they might interact with the things we're building. Now, in exchanging that data, so the stories, the identity, and the dignity, we need to really make this exchange considerate and respectful. So why should you bother thinking about ethics? Because there is no external ethical committee in product development. So if you think about the medical field or psychology, any sort of similar field, there will be an external committee overlooking the quality of dealing with individuals, with people. And research ethics is not something that gets taught in school really, or in design education, in product education. And so protecting the data, the stories, the identity, and the dignities of those individuals is our collective responsibility. Okay, so I have a poll for you. I'd like you to just have a go and see which one you think applies here. So ethics in user research protects only research participants, the teams running the research, both, or perhaps you have no idea. So let's see. Oh, I can see the votes coming. That's good. I found it. Okay, I can see a few answers coming in. That's great. I don't see any more answers coming, so I'm going to assume that's it for now. So yes, all of the above. It's both the research participants, which are at the core of the work that we do, but also the teams running the research, the organization, really anyone involved in developing those products and services that we're building. Okay. So this one is the official definition from Ninsel Norman. The research ethics is the careful consideration of the rights, the well-being, and the dignity of people involved in research activities. And now, when you think about people involved in the research activities, I'd like you to think about everyone, really, starting from the person who's the participant in the research, and expanding to the team, the wider organization, and not forgetting that you, the user researcher, the designer running the research, are also one of those people. And when we run any sort of user research or work that involves users at the core, we expect those sessions to go in a certain way. We plan for them, right? But I'm sure you've all that with it. Things don't usually go as planned because people are unpredictable, really. And if you deal with people, you will most certainly deal with unpredictable situations. And that's what, and that's the advantage of ethics. It really helps you deal with that uncertainty and unpredictability. And that's why today I want to share a few strategies to help you better deal with those unexpected circumstances. And I have 3 stories that I'd like to share. These come from my experience, things that I've lived on my own skin. And these are strategies that I'm going to share strategies that I've learned to preempt what might happen and support you when things don't go as planned. I want to just highlight that some viewers might find aspects of the stories that I'm going to be sharing today upsetting, because I'm going to be talking about self-harm and drug addiction. But all participants have been anonymized and all the stories end up in a positive way, and we took away positive learnings. Okay, so the first story I want to share is about a time I was part of the team that made it possible for Londoners to report crime online. So working for the Metropolitan Police, which is the main police force in London, and before that time, it was impossible for people to report crime in other ways than in person in the police station or over the phone, calling the emergency services. When this project then went live, it's now since that time, it's possible to report crime online, and crime gets triaged via a complex set of services that are dealt with and used by the operational center of the Metropolitan Police. By this point, the project had been going on for a few weeks, a few months really, and discovery work to date included all sorts of shadowing and observations and ways to learn about crime was reported and triaged by the police themselves. And we were towards the end of the project, we were validating and sort of iterating the final flow for how crime might be reported online. So I was running a session with a transgender respondent who had been recruited because of their recent experiences of reporting a minor crime. I think it was burglary. And when we were in the room together, they started talking about other experiences they had of hate crime and harassment because of their identity. And so during the session, when I was with them in the room, they broke down and they looked and were highly distressed. They started crying. Now, I was not expecting this. If you think about it, I was in the room with them and I had the design team listening next door together with the wider team. So loads of police officers who were invited to observe how the testing was going. And I was in the room with this person who started crying, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to deal with it. It was down to me to take action in that moment, in a situation that felt really quite uncomfortable. And when something like this happens, the first thing you should probably do is just take a breather, just stop and breathe. And the first lesson, obviously, is to think, to protect participants, to create a safe zone for participants. Because I had the client watching and I had the team watching, the first thing I did after breathing was stopping the broadcasting and the recording to give this person time to recompose themselves. I found a small excuse to step out of the room, getting them a glass of water, then having a quick chat, making sure that they were okay with continuing the session. Because obviously, in this case, they volunteer their own vulnerability, they share their own story, and I wanted to make sure that it was okay for them to continue. And I assured them that it was also okay if they wanted to stop. But they decided they wanted to continue because they wanted to make the experience of reporting those other type of crimes better for people like them who might experience the same. The second learning is to aim for variety. So the story that I shared was kind of not really planned because we had not planned to recruit someone who was a transgender person. We had not planned to talk about hate crime and harassment specifically. We had sort of touched upon different types of crimes and the way they are reported in the discovery phase of the project. But obviously, we could have, in the circumstances, we could probably expand it a little bit more at the start of the project to using ways such as research by proxy. So we're using proxies for other sort of representatives of other type of people that might have experienced a variety of different type of crimes by, for example, looking outside of the Metropolitan Police themselves, talking to associations that deal with victims of crime and kind of expanding. Obviously, given the circumstances of the project and given the deadlines and the budget at the time, this was the best way we could have gone about it. But that's just something to consider when you're looking back. And then something else that I've learned after this happened was something that we probably did, but we should have done a little bit more carefully. And after this happened, I've then sort of implemented in my practice. Always have thorough pre-briefing, both with the team and with the participants. So with the team, so that everyone, including the design teams, including all the observers, can really help you observe and look out for things that you might not be noticing. If you're running the session yourself, you might get distracted or focused. You will get focused on running the session. So there might be signals and things that you might not notice. And if you have a thorough pre-briefing with the team, not only they can support you afterwards and during, but they can also help you spot things you might have not seen. Research is a team sport, really. And the second aspect to that is also doing the same with participants, not just handing over a consent form, expecting that they understand the context and what it means to run user research and what their participation looks like, but really reiterating the role that they play, the fact that even if they want to stop the session or leave the session, it's fine, and they can really do that. Their incentive will not be taken away. There will still be the insights that they share might or might not still be relevant. And if they need time to recompose themselves, they can do that. And it's really important to have a conversation about it rather than just handing out a form. And the last thing is to be very clear about your role and their role as well. So setting really clear boundaries, because in a research session, you might give the impression of building this personal relationship with a participant, because obviously you're building empathy, you want them to share as much as possible. But at the same time, you don't want them to share too much, and you want your role to be absolutely 100% clear. You're there to help develop or improve that product, and you can't really help beyond that. So it's natural for people to share more, but just be aware of that dynamic and clearly don't be ashamed or scared to signal when it's not okay to share more, which we will cover later. The second story that I want to share, it's about a time when I was working for Babylon. Babylon Health is a telemedicine company, and we were exploring broad topic with regards to better understanding the context of a very specific population they are serving. So that's kind of like lower socioeconomic status. And these are people that are eligible for a specific type of insurance in the US, which is Medicaid. So in that context, we were running a series of 90 minutes interviews, in-depth interviews with people from different backgrounds to understand a little bit more about their relationship with healthcare services in general. And we were looking for opportunities for Babylon to engage with them. So as I kicked off one of the sessions, one of the respondents started sort of dialed in, and the first thing they shared was, "I'm an addict." And I said, "What type of addict?" And she went on to explain how she was an heroin addict, and her husband was also, and they've both recently lost their job, and they were really struggling to get to the end of their week. Now, as you can imagine, again, I was totally unprepared for this conversation, because obviously the first thing they shared was that their addiction and how it impacted her life and her family's life, which really triggered an alarm at the back of my head of how do I maintain this conversation focused whilst showing empathy, obviously, for her. And the sort of ultimate goal was that I don't have this person leaving the session worse off than when they started. That in having a conversation with her, I don't trigger anything worse. And all the while being supportive and human. And also, obviously, I had at the back of my mind also wanted to do something to help her, which was totally out of what I should have done, but it was there. I couldn't really help but fighting with that feeling. And so deep down, I was just deeply saddened by the conversation. And as per the previous learning, the number one concern was to protect the participant, to really create this safe zone and making sure that whatever they were sharing, they were okay with sharing it, and that they will get the incentive, they could leave if they didn't feel comfortable with sharing more. They were ready. But the second learning that I want to highlight here is to also think about protecting your team and your own well-being, because you're also running the session and you're also on the front line of running that research. So having having thought about a mechanism to protect yourself as well and the team, both in the moment and after the session and afterwards. So in the moment, so we talked earlier about how it's important to have thorough briefing for the team. So in this case, my colleague who was not taking on the call was completely prepared to what could have happened. We were both prepared because we've obviously read and talked about the opium crisis in the US. But one thing is reading about it, one thing is hearing stories that have affected this individual and their family directly. And in terms of the session itself, during the session, I took a deep breath and I messaged my colleague to make sure that, as I was running the session, to ensure that she was okay as well, listening to this topic, because it was quite, everything that was being shared was quite, it was sad, and I wanted to make sure they were okay listening in, and they were okay with me continuing with the session for as long as the participant wanted. I as well took again, as we talked about earlier, took a few deep breaths, and I also, on top of running the session, I started taking notes of the things that it was worth checking on later after the session when we would have debriefed. And then having a mechanism for afterwards. So if you think about it, when you're running research in nowadays age, you're always doing this remotely. So when I closed the computer, I was by myself in the office and my colleague was at home. So I shut the computer down and I was so shaken that I almost started crying myself because it was a lot to take in. And thanks God, my team were in the office that day, so I could go out and talk to them. So I started sharing what had happened, and why it shaken me with the rest of the team. And I was lucky. And then I dialed into a new Zoom call and I contacted my colleague, and we went through that list that I made during the session and that they also made to make sure that every single point was addressed and that we just talked about what had happened and why it had been so tough. So that's really, really important, to be kind to yourself and to respect the fact that you're taking a lot on and you need to share it with others. Don't just keep it for yourself. And then a minor consideration for this project was that obviously there was a big barrier between me being in London and dialing in remotely from my computer and this person being somewhere in the US. There was a lot of distance between us, so it would have been much better to be in person and to talk about these topics in person, which was kind of, it was covered in the overall plan of this project, but it's just a consideration to think about it as much as possible to reduce biases for the project. Should probably just drink some water. So the last story, third and last story. It's also when I was at Babylon, so these telemedicine companies still. And we were designing a feature to help patients with their refill prescriptions. So this is a service patients could access from the app, and they could request it after the doctors. And we were working closely with the clinical team and the pharmacists who would receive that data to issue to refill their prescriptions. So we've done the bulk of the work. We've worked on all the sort of internal facing services. And now we were, again, refining this flow to make sure it worked with patients. And so we were recruiting a representative sample, and we were using an online form to do that. And in this online form for recruitment, there was an open field. And at the end of the flow, there was an open-ended question that asked, is there anything else you would like to add? And one person revealed that they were feeling suicidal. Now, if you think about it, we read the responses, and we read that someone at the other end of the screen were thinking of taking their own life. And this is a very serious situation. Knowing this information, well, first of all, it's a serious situation because it's dangerous for the person, but it's also knowing this information meant that we needed to act on it. So first of all, protecting the respondents, as we discussed earlier, creating a safe space for them. And we did that by contacting and escalating the situation with our clinical team that followed appropriate clinical practice in that case. So they went out and implemented all the processes to make sure the respondent was safeguarded. But the aspect I want to highlight in this specific case is also, on top of all the things that we already discussed, is so knowing that the person was feeling suicidal was obviously the main concern, and making sure that was covered. But once that was covered, I was leading this project, and I was ultimately responsible for anything that happened. But knowing that information made me, my team, and ultimately the organization I worked for liable for anything that would have happened to that person. So knowing that piece of information meant we had to act on it. And that's why it was so stressful. And that's also why this led the whole team. So I kind of initiated a series of things to make sure that the whole of the processes for recruiting online was reviewed, so that we could avoid exposing and creating that sort of risk for the organization, which in this case was as simple as just avoiding an open question in the recruitment screener. Something that we did, but we didn't think to, so we exposed the subject matter expert, in this case the whole team of the clinicians and the pharmacists, in the overall planning of this project. But we didn't really focus on exposing the detail of the screener questions in this case, because we didn't think he would have such an impact. And that's definitely a learning I took out, especially given the circumstances and given the topic for this project. But also always sort of trying to find strategies to move the onus away from you. So in this case, no open questions, but also signposting to, for example, in this instance, it would have been better to signposting to support services for mental health crises. So all of those three experiences that I talked about were really touching. And as Einstein said, the only source of knowledge is experience. So I've learned a lot from all of them. They took me out of my comfort zone in many different ways. But here's the deal. When you work at the forefront of user research, and you deal with complex spaces and different types of people, things will not go as planned, and you never know what's going to happen. And a little decision will have really big impact. And you can't really just include the easy participants, because the more variety, as I talked about earlier, the more interesting and insightful the projects will get, and the products will get better as a consequence. So to recap what we discussed today, first of all, always think of creating that safe zone and protecting participants. Think about protecting your team, having the right support on top, before and after, giving that thorough pre-briefing, making sure that the team is working with you as a team. Protect the organization, so take all the steps that are necessary to reduce reputational risk, and thinking of the impact of small decisions beyond the team. And don't forget that you, as a user researcher or the team running the project, are also important, and think about mechanisms and strategies to protect your own well-being, and to make sure that you and the team have a time to reflect on the things that happened, if those things are worth discussing and reflecting on. And then there's a whole layer of things that we talked about in terms of enriching the approach and making sure that you can avoid those biases that are naturally part of the work that we do. Being very transparent and honest about your role and respondent's role. And always thinking about that moral, psychological, but also practical support for everyone who is involved. And this is a little summary of all the topics that we discussed today. I can go back to it, but thank you for listening. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to take them now. I can leave this up. So I'm just checking the chat. Alan, you're on mute if you're... Oh. Oh, there you are.
Okay, am I coming through?
Yes.
No. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Okay.
Do you want me to just...
Yes.
Yes, well done.
And I think we have a international lag, so we have to avoid talking over each other. But we can look in the chat for questions. I certainly thought your presentation was insightful, and I have a few that could maybe seed the discussion. But let's see what we have in the chat.
I can see there are a few questions from Zoe.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned the considerability in recruitment. How would you speak with a skeptical stakeholder about this topic and explain that we need these in recruitment? That's a very good question. I guess it all starts from involving stakeholders from the beginning and do the planning together, possibly having a good set of like positive examples of how things have gone in other projects and the impact it had on the project. And I can't think of anything else at the top of my mind, but I'm sure there are many other things. There's another question from Zoe on where would you advise someone to start with ethics for a team that is inexperienced with these? No idea. There are a few resources online, but I haven't really found a central place I haven't found a really good central place of knowledge on Medium. There would be loads of interesting resources. There's another one from Zoe. How would you deal with a pushback on ethics if team or stakeholders say we don't need to think about those issues? Those difficult stakeholders. Again, I think I would share where things have gone wrong and give examples, or perhaps think about all the possible, like have a session where we think about all the possible scenarios to make it real for them, I guess. Okay, so there is a question from Josh, and so there are seemingly infinite intersections of different identities and experiences. How do you choose where to focus when considering variety? One way of doing it, probably not the only way, is to rely on subject matter experts. So whatever the topic, obviously in this case, well, in both cases, both in healthcare and in the public sector, there are loads of people who are exposed to a lot more variety than you will ever be. So just rely on them and try to expand your impact by talking to as many people as possible that can help you identify other people that might have had more experiences. I think that's a good way of doing that. And
Lucia, if I may interrupt,
yes,
it's a lot of cognitive load to read the questions yourself. So may I do that for you?
Oh, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah,
because of it's actually quite small on the screen as well. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's see. So Evelyn D asks whether you've set up agreements with participants beforehand on the limits of what they talk about, of what they might talk about. Do you have any sort of participation agreement that you use?
In healthcare, yes, because obviously you want to make sure that people don't know you're a doctor, and therefore it's not. I don't think it's necessarily something you want to write down, but perhaps at the time of recruiting, making sure that that's clear to participants, but then reiterate at the start of the session to make sure that they understand it. Now, healthcare is quite specific, though. It's different to other industries. So I think, yes, having a line in the screener or any consent forms that get shared just clarifies that you cannot help beyond the products and the services that you're helping building, I guess. But I'm open to hearing other perspectives. Yeah.
Okay. So if I may jump in with a few of my own, for one, I want to acknowledge some of the really practical takeaways, like the danger of open questions for user research, especially in highly sensitive areas like such as your interaction. So that was new to me and makes total sense. So one thing I find fascinating about your work, and I'm curious about how you handle this, since you're doing international user research, you have the laws of the UK, you have the laws of the United States, you have the laws of other countries. The US law is really segregated into the laws of 50 different states. So how do you stay on top of any legal issues that might influence your interaction with your subjects?
100%, a very good question, and a very complex one. And I think, again, with Babylon and with healthcare, it was extremely complicated because you also had all the medical legislation layers on top, such as HIPAA, which is very specific to healthcare. Stakeholders, like relying on individuals internally and working as closely as possible with the experts, because obviously I'm thinking of Babylon because that's the most recent experience, but I've done that in previous roles and previous experiences as well. Like, for example, working in government with the UK Home Office, that was actually quite similar. So building those relationships with the people that are dealing with that population, because they would know definitely more than you do. So I think user research or design practice will have a set of legislation such as GDPR, etc., that you have to follow, but then there will be additional ones that you might have not considered, or additional considerations for dealing with certain groups of people that you just might not have realized. And I always rely on stakeholders as much as possible, and I try and involve them from the beginning so that they can shape that process. And what I mentioned earlier in terms of being quite transparent about the process and the detail of the process, that's a learning that I've taken, that the more you share about why you're doing certain things and which legislation you're following, or perhaps it's not a legislation, it's just, again, an ethical consideration on top of the way you're doing things because X, Y, Z, they might actually help you and bring in a view that you could have not considered because obviously you're not familiar with that.
Okay, wonderful. And I feel like you knew my second question. And before I pose my second question, I want to invite participants to continue to load the chat with questions. We have about 5 minutes left. So you mentioned legislation and ethics in your answer. And I do love the answer about relying on stakeholders and subject matter experts for guidance. That's very wise advice. But have you encountered situations where the ethics and the law conflict, and how do you handle that?
I guess the issue with the ethics is that there are considerations that go beyond the legislation. which makes it also difficult. I guess the legislation thinks about the sort of like non-personal side of the data, but when the ethical approach actually looks at the more personal side of the data and kind of like respecting the individual, thinking about the individual, there's no law for doing that. It's just, yeah.
I like that. Okay, that's a very interesting distinction. Part of my motivation is, being a U.S. citizen. There are, some disturbing trends in the legislation that, are borderline on actively allowing discrimination against certain classes, certain groups, and it's very troubling as a citizen, and I'm sure it's even more so as a researcher. So thank you. Let's see, Zoe says, I really like the framework you show on the slide. Is this available anywhere to reference and use?
That's a very good point. I should finally publish it. Yeah, it will be.
Okay, Zoe encourages you to do so.
I will. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Is there any more questions?
And if I've missed any in the chat, feel free to repost. We'll watch the chat for another, well, we have about 3 minutes. But if there are no questions.
Thank you, everyone, for listening then. And thanks, Alan, for inviting me here.
Oh, absolutely. You're getting lots of accolades in the chat. So thank you so much for such an, I think, original and insightful presentation.
Thank you. Will the chat be available later if I want to go back to some of the discussions?
I don't recall if the chat is part of the recording. I believe it is, but I'm not absolutely certain. But we can
copy the questions just in case. Nice.
Yeah, we can confirm that.
And if anyone has just thoughts or wants to share the story, please do reach out on LinkedIn.
I was just going to ask how people can find you. So LinkedIn. Then.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Okay. And for the main channel, chat logs will be included in the recording.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day and enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, all.